I'd like you to look at the population. Okay, that also lives in Maine. And if you click on it, what you should see is that it indicates it's a replicated population. It's creating multiple agents that are living within this population, and particularly 10,000. 10,000 is just the 100 by 100 for the number of grid cells, okay? So now I'd like you to go to the cell class, okay? So double click on cell, okay? And you'll note cell here is denoting the sort of grid patch, regardless of whether it's live or not. So the model is you have this patch, and the patch may contain a live thing or not, okay? So here we have the cell, and what we're going to do is take a look at some properties of it. So I'm going to go through a set of variables located within the cell. So within the cell, what we have is we have a set of variables here. We also have a visual representation, which is in the upper left, we'll be getting to. Okay, so just to sort of orient ourselves, each cell keeps track of a couple of things. And some of these things are conveniences to speed up computation. Others communicate important information that's used for the rules, where that information is collected at one point and used at another. And yet others indicate key aspects of state, okay? So this alive here, I think it's a poor name. It should be called is alive by Java conventions, is alive. But here they call it live. And this indicates whether or not the agent is alive, okay? So it's a Boolean, which means it's true or false. And you'll notice that its initial value is set to random true. Where have we seen this before? Does anyone remember what this did? We actually saw it in the previous one, random true, 0.1. So we did see it in a state chart context, but what did it do? It draws, it flips a coin, a biased coin, okay? So it's a Bernoulli draw with a probability of yielding, it either yields true or false, and it yields true with a probability of 0.1. So it's called random true, okay? Probability of 0.1, it yields true. Otherwise, it returns false. Yeah. Okay, so here we have a variable called alive, which is determining am I alive or not as a cell. And with a chance 0.1 initially, you're alive, otherwise you're dead. So this is what determines, this is what's used to seed those initial cells on the screen. Why some of them are red and some of them are lemon chiffon. Believe me, I love it. I wouldn't know what it was, but that's what it is. Okay, so that's the live variable. It's an aspect of state. It's the cell state. Now we could have represented that as a state chart. They chose to represent it as a variable. It's a somewhat arbitrary decision, and you might do it either way. I probably would have preferred state chart just so visually it was very evident, but it's a choice. Okay, there's a couple other variables. One is neighbors. Okay.
I'm sorry, is there a computational difference in terms of time or memory usage using as a variable?
There is some difference in terms of memory usage. It's going to require a modest amount more. I'm guessing maybe 10% more memory if you did it as a state chart. You know, I'd be interested in looking at that, but I think it would be a modest amount of additional memory. On the flip side, if someone were to see it, they'd immediately see visually, okay, you're either alive or dead, and that's the relevant distinction. And so in terms of communication, you know, that's where you'd argue the benefit is. And in terms of limiting misunderstandings or, you know, for a lot of models I build, I have to work with clients, right? I mean, clients who are not, you know, not themselves interested in building up these models, not themselves directly interested in digging through them, but when I discuss it with them and they see a state chart, they have some gut feel for how that works, and that's important. Rather than seeing a thing that says Boolean and, you know, they exhibit uncomfortable reflexes.
Wouldn't there be more calculations then, because there will be
There will.
two states and transition?
There will be more calculation, and so, you know, probably what you'd have to do is you'd either have to transition trigger based on that, or you could send a message, and there'd be more overhead. And what you'd really want to do is set the trade-off. So what I probably would do if I were thinking about doing this is do a little spike, what's called a spike prototype. So I do it in a little piece of it in one versus the other, and sort of check their memory consumption, check their relative speed, and then I decide, okay, should I go this direction or should I go that direction before investing in a larger model, okay? Okay, there's another component, which is neighbors. So this is does anyone recognize what this is? We actually saw this before in a previous model in the discussion of Java. This is, yeah, it's a reference to an array. And we talked about these some before, but the basic deal is we have this thing called neighbors associated with each cell. So let's imagine a certain cell object at runtime. Neighbors is going to refer to some array, and here it's going to have how many elements? North, south, east, west. Sorry. I hope you didn't take a picture of that. Okay, yeah. So north, south, east, west, and each of these is going to be referring to another. It's actually going to refer to a cell. These are going to refer to cells that are on my north, south, east, west, and each of those is going to have a neighbors of its own. It's going to have a liveness and all that sort of stuff. Each of those is going to have all these variables in it. So this is this is a reference to an array that's going to contain these references to these different cells, each of which is going to have this information. So these are all cells, right? Cell. Okay, so we're keeping around this information. Turns out that this is a performance issue. They just wanted to get this once and not have to keep on requesting it from the software. So it gets it once at the beginning of the whole model operation running, and then it sort of just keeps that information around and uses it. Okay, so it's a reference to a so-called array type. That's the sort of thing that this neighbors references. Okay, so it keeps track of who its neighbors are. It's like having a little phone book which has their neighbors in onto your property, so you can call them quickly. Okay, so you don't have to look them up in the phone book. Yeah.
What's the axis?
So,
Output axis.
oh, okay. After this here? Okay. Okay, so I do have some material on this and I'll be presenting separately, but suffice it to say that when you declare so let me figure out how much to say right now. So basically when you define something within a model, or more broadly in AnyLogic, you're defining properties of this thing, and you're defining behavior, methods, okay? Things that do things, accomplish things. They either compute some number or they perform some task, okay? Now, there's a question of who do you want to be using those things or to know about them? Because after all, I might be storing some information that's for my use, but I don't want anyone else to be sort of prying on it or using it or counting on it because it might change over time, for example. I might have certain things that perform jobs within me, but I don't want to have to maintain them later if someone else is counting on them. So I would make those things so-called private. So basically these are so that no one else takes them as promises to maintain that information for the world in later versions of this thing that I'm building up. So no one else should be counting on these things if they're private. This public says anyone else in the model could look at this information, can get this information. So anyone else could ask for how many items around me are live, okay? And if I allow the public within the model to access that, it implies a certain responsibility I have to take. It's kind of like if you have information publicly available on a website, you want to be sure that it's maintained with appropriate integrity, with appropriate safeguards, so that no one else can stomp on it, right? And no one else can, you want to make sure there's no erroneous information there, because other people could cite it or whatever. So in short, when we build things within programs and models as an example, we want to be clear about what we're promising. That sounds odd, but this information, for example, is used internally by this cell. By my book, this should not be public. It should be private. So here, if you go look at this thing, if you go look at nAliveAround, this is, in fact, I have another slide on it here. This is counting the number of neighbors around my cell that are alive at the current time. And I compute this at one point, but I only update it periodically. And here, what I would have done is I would have said private, and then basically only this class could deal with this. No one else can kind of go in there and grab that information out. And I don't have to worry that any other pieces of code in this model are counting on it. It's only things in cell, okay? And it turns out that means less worries when I'm thinking about if I get to change this, who will be impacted? Like what areas of the model will be impacted, yeah.
So I don't understand where Arena is telling, which function to store information in that.
Okay.
Variable. So how does this variable know if I store variable label?
Okay, I'm going to show you exactly where that's determined in a second. So AnyLogic, yeah. So this private here, it actually doesn't affect how the model runs. It affects what. So by changing this, it won't change how the model runs per se. What it will change is what's allowed elsewhere in the model, and it's basically a way of being tidy. Okay. And I have a separate lecture that will talk about this, okay? It's about when we're building systems, we have to be tidy, because if we're not, we're gonna build as big a mess as the world out there. And models should simplify. They shouldn't complicate our lives, okay? And when we're building particularly agent-based models, there's lots of moving parts, and we have to be careful about how we build them so that we're neat and tidy, and we have clear understanding of what's going on, because it will lower the risk of mistakes. Okay? So this private here currently was public. They didn't really pay attention to it. It really should be private, to be honest. And if you did that and you compile it up here, it'll be fine. So I'm going to do my thing. Okay, so what you are asking, though, is sort of operationally, how this says it's going to count the number of neighbors. Where is that determined? Who's computing that? Show me, right? That's what they say in Missouri. It's a show me state. You didn't think you'd learn that in this class, did you? Well, it is. Go look it up, just like Connecticut is the nutmeg state. Okay, so now let's go up and click on that red dot. The upper left. Do you see it? Okay, so go to the dynamic tab. Can anyone interpret for me what's going on here? There's a bit of logic here. What is this logic? Anyone want to hazard a guess? What is it? Yeah, so I heard some good things here. So it's an if then else. This is what this question mark and colon means. It actually means if alive is true, then the value of fill color is this, otherwise it's that. And the value is, so what does this mean? Can anyone explain in sort of lay terms what this would say?
If the agent's alive, color it red, otherwise it's color orange.
Yeah, that's right. So if this cell is alive, make it red. Otherwise, make it lemon chiffon. I told you. Okay, so it selects the appearance. Okay, now this is where the rubber, ladies and gentlemen, meets the road. Okay, what we're going to look at here is under cell. I'd like you to go to the agent properties. Now, what we're going to see here is something that is allowed and supported because we have this framework of discrete time, okay? We're dividing things up into time steps. And, you know, I'm feeling like I should have done this in a slightly different order. But suffice it to say that that this model's environment said to use discrete time, to use time steps, okay? To have these steps where the whole model's updated at once, okay? All the agents are updated at the same time, lockstep. They all stride forward with stepping forward at the same time.
And so big picture, what's the advantage of that, or when might you want to?
Okay, so there are many models that concern themselves with behavior that occurs on defined points. Okay, and the logic involved is such that you want the updates to all occur in kind of a symmetric way, sort of all at those points, all in unison. And so rather than dealing with the vagaries of kind of having some update early and then others, they want to just have it all kind of done at once. Now that's a simplifying decision in a model, but it does lead to kind of expressing it, specifying it in AnyLogic in a different way than you'd specify a continuous model.
So if I'm dealing with something that's got discrete states,
Yeah.
and I wanted to capture those discrete states, this would be my tool.
No. Okay, so I'd like to distinguish between, and forgive me, I'm just going to spend 2 or 3 minutes here, maybe 5 minutes, on distinguishing 3 types